Thanks, Fred, ladies and gentlemen. Oh, the small crew today. What's going on there? So maybe because it's cold up here. I don't know. It's largely irrelevant. So hey, those who are joining us today, hey, thank you very much for turning up to the next hour where I bang on about confidence. Talk about confidence being a measure of you, not your product. Oh, product DT. Misspelled product quite badly. But anyway, so that word there on the supposed to say product. So, like I say to lots of my webinar attendees, if you're not prepared to see some amateurism at play, you're not prepared for one of my webinars. Anyway, so before we start talking about confidence, I'm going to really surprise you with what we're about to talk about, which is a foot. This is a human foot. Now, when I say this is a human foot, I'm actually looking at a picture, which you guys are as well, of something that represents a human foot. This is not an actual image of a human foot. It's a drawing of a human foot. And that's because we're going to talk about feet in a very abstract way, or maybe not super abstract. Anyway, so I'll start trying to tie this story together. There is a shoe company in Europe which prioritizes and focuses on selling largely athletic shoes. And that means they have some pretty sophisticated machinery to measure and analyze the size of people's feet. And in fact, they have actually compiled 1.2 million foot scans from across 715 footwear stores. Like I said, focusing on active and sporty shoes. It's quite a handy data set. Now, what does that mean? Why am I talking about feet when it comes to confidence? Well, just bear with me for a tick. What they did with this huge amount of data set was to create a probability distribution of European male foot length. And this is the distribution you can see on the screen. This blue line represents the spread of foot length in terms of millimeters. Now, I know a lot of North American webinar attendees, as soon as we talk about anything measured using the metric scale, heads explode. I apologize for that in advance, but let's just see if we can push on through this conversation without the very familiar inches and feet and yards. Anyway, so foot length, roughly, maybe on average, perhaps 270 millimeters is the typical foot length of the European male. And you can see that this curve here, this blue line, has some really key characteristics that we can maybe pull out of it. One is that if you look on the right-hand side, there appears to be a bell shape. Now, for those of you, I'm sorry, who have attended some of my previous webinars, you should know that the bell curve describes many natural processes that are the sum of other processes. So a classic example in the world of reliability engineering is the amount of damage a tire accumulates over its life, where tread is worn away at a fairly consistent rate. So for every mile or kilometer you drive, you tend to lose the same amount of tread on a tire. And so the total amount of tread you've lost is based on the sum of the treads, little tread deltas that have been lost for every mile or kilometer driven. And so we see the bell curve do a magnificent job of describing the distance to failure of a rubber tire, because that's when things, that failure is based on things adding up. But you can see that there's a bit of a left tail over here on the left-hand side. There's something going on. The curve is got a clear bell element to it. But you can see there's a left tail on the left-hand side. And some of you might be already brainstorming about what might be behind this deviation from the bell curve, which we know does a really good job of describing, amongst other things, human growth. And so let's keep going this little analysis, little discussion. And we note that if we look at the probability distribution from these 1.2 million scans, we have this distribution here for the European female foot length. You can see it is almost all bell curve with virtually no tail at all. So just remember this. Remember this characteristic. We have two curves which show the probability distribution of male versus female feet. You can see the female curve, the orange one, is to the left, as you would expect, because it models a shorter foot in general. But for some reason, the female distribution has no left tail. So just remember that. You can see they're very similar in terms of shapes, but there's no left tail. So I'm going to come back to this anomaly later on. So when we look at this tail, what might be the reason that there is a tail in general for European male feet length? Anyone want to suggest anything in the chat window? Why might there be a left-hand tail? What does this represent? What might be causing it? Who's brave enough to throw an idea my way? Measurement error? Okay. Measurement error is Kevin's one. Any more? Stunted growth for external reasons. Got that. Yep. So some sort of medical condition where people don't grow to their full, to what would be a full, anticipated to be a full human height. A genetic group of people, as in for some reason we have, we do know, for example, the Dutch are considered to be the tallest people in the world. So there is genetics behind different anatomies. Nutrition early in life, Evan, of course. Dwarfism in males. So that sort of reflects the sort of stunted growth for external reasons, or non-representative sample size, too small. Okay, so out of these ideas here, which ones would be specific to males and not females? And give you a hint. Just so you know, females and males are equally likely to suffer from medical conditions which stunts growth. So do we have any one of these ideas which are going to be particular? Specific sports. Okay, I like that. So maybe there's a male sport thing going on. Interesting. All right. Puberty. Right. Accidents. Lots of different things. Well, the thing is that when we see this sort of, if we just sort of male distribution with this long left tail, a lot of the ideas you've come up with could be valid. The issue is that when we see it only in one subpopulation, not the other, we can eliminate a lot of potential root causes of this this left tail. So measurement error, for example, probably wouldn't be included. We know that unless the measurement error is for some reason only triggered when it's measuring a male foot versus a female foot, it can go. Same with medical conditions, because medical conditions affect females as a rule just as often as males. Specific sports, maybe there's male specific sports where, for whatever reason, those shoes, smaller shoes are needed, like it. It turns out though, in this scenario, we have European male foot length compared to white has that one. That left tail, I should say. When we see this tail over here, it was determined that this was essentially because males were young, let's call them boys, young males, not fully developed males, were actually more into buying athletic shoes than younger females in Europe. So without it being a statement about whether male or females have equal rights to play sports, it certainly isn't the case. It just turns out that a lot more young boys, young males who aren't fully grown, are buying more athletic shoes earlier in their life, as opposed to females. For whatever reason, that doesn't happen quite as early. And the reason why I'm doing this is because, although it's not immediately relevant to today's conversation about confidence, I never want to ever put up curves or lines or statistics or probability anythings without trying to encourage people to look for meaning. So if you see something you don't expect, regardless of whether you think it influences your analysis or not, you should really try and understand why you have this unexpected tail. Because if there's something that's unexpected in the data you're analyzing, then who's to say that the data you're analyzing is valid? If you don't know why it looks weird, then how can you be confident that you're about to make some really good decisions based on your analysis? And there is always a story behind data and things like distributions of people's feet. But let's keep going on when we're talking about confidence. We know that we have, for example, this orange line representing a good distribution of female foot lengths on the left-hand side, which is taller and narrower. and it's compared to the distribution for the European male foot size or foot lengths. And so that is something we do expect, that if we see, for example, it reversed where males, or for some reason, the distribution suggests their foot length is smaller, that gives us a lot less confidence in the underlying data. But let's keep moving along with this discussion about confidence. So let's just say that we have our foot, which is, my computer's doing its thing, that needs that caffeine Fred suggested earlier. Let's just say that instead of dealing with feet, we are now dealing with shoes. And when I say dealing with shoes, let's just say we found this athletics shoe in Switzerland, which is, just to be clear, in Europe. Not the European Union, mind you, but in Europe. And it turns out that this shoe that we found, maybe it was at a murder scene or some crime, or we're trying to, a detective is trying to get to the bottom of who might be wearing this shoe for the purpose of putting the perpetrator in jail, learning what's going on. And let's just say we look at this shoe, and it turns out this shoe fits a foot that is 270 millimeters long. So the detective might be saying to him, asking himself, does this shoe belong to a male or female? Well, it's a pretty long shoe, so I'm somewhat confident it's a male shoe, or the person wearing it when they lost their shoe was male. But let's try and quantify this a bit. So if we go back to this distribution of feet length, we can see this shoe, athletic shoe, typical of the one that's sold by this store, which has 1.2 million scans. If we draw a line down to the horizontal axis, we can see that, well, the orange curve isn't zero, so it's possible that a female was wearing this shoe, because the orange curve is still got some height there, which does tell us that some females have a foot length that's 270 millimeters long, or foot length of 270 millimeters. We can also see that it's way more probable for this shoe to belong to a male, because this is the typical foot length of a European male. So right away, we have more confidence that this shoe was worn by a male. We can't say with absolute certainty, but we have some more confidence that this belongs to a male. But let's try and quantify this a little bit more. And this is how most confidence analyses go. Essentially, these curves are probability density functions, which give the relative probability that a continuous random variable is equal to a specific value. The blue column on the right-hand side is essentially the height of the blue probability distribution curve, or density function curve, I should say, at 270 millimeters. And the red column on the left is the height of the corresponding probability density function for the female foot length. You can see just how much higher this column is compared, on the right-hand side, is compared to the one on the left-hand side. It turns out if we know that for the purpose of this discussion, without trying to get any contentious discussion about how many genders there are, biologically, when it comes to feet, we can make a relatively decent assumption that we can, for the purpose of this detective story, that there are only two genders involved from a biological perspective when it comes to foot length, nothing else. Not interested in opening that can of worms. But then if we're to put these two columns on top of each other and essentially say, well, this represents the total possibilities of what's going on. The shoe wearer was either male or female. Then of the total combined column height, 86.7% of this is attributed to a male, and 13.3% of this entire column height is attributed to a female. And so now we can start putting some useful quantitative numbers to the confidence associated with this shoe. We can say that we are now 86.7% confident that the owner of this shoe was male, and 13.3% confident that the owner of this shoe is female. Now, this is not enough for a conviction by any stretch. I even works out who the person is. But if this is combined with other information that the detective identifies at the scene, so if this combined with other evidence to suggest the perpetrator was male, then it starts increasing this confidence even further. And so throughout this discussion, we're going to be talking about confidence a lot. So based on this information, we can say we are 86.7% confident the shoe belongs to a male. And if you understood that in a very rudimentary sense, well, you've actually understood most of the statistical school of thought when it comes to quantifying confidence. Remember, reliability is a measure of your system, but confidence is a measure of you. Confidence isn't a measure of your system. That shoe has no concept of confidence. That shoe is what that shoe is. We analyze it to develop our own confidence about what that shoe represents, but confidence is a measure of you. It doesn't mean there's no statistics involved. Now, some organizations get all of their confidence from their belief in a reliability mindset. That is, they make sure they do things right the first time. They don't cut corners. They might do robust FMEAs or robust halt or robust fault tree analyses or whatever the right tool for that product is. And they might invest all their time and effort into chaos engineering the way Netflix does. A lot of organizations are out there not measuring reliability. They just get their confidence from that first principles approach to making things work. They know if they do things right from the first time. They know if they empower their junior engineers, their employees, or they know if they train these people to be confident in making the right decisions regarding confidence, that they will have robust products at the end. But there's always a place where you can get confidence from data. So when I say let's go back to our wireless modem router. The reason why I'm saying why I go back to our wireless modem router is because in previous webinars where I've looked at Weibull analysis, for example, I've used a wireless modem router. So for those of us joining me today for the first time, there is a little bit of a story going on with my series of webinars, which was why you see the words, let's go back to something we did in the past. But don't worry, we are not going to, you're not going to miss out on too much by not having attended any previous webinars if that applies to you. So let's look at a wireless modem router. And here is a wireless modem router. And let's just say you're part of a company who wants to manufacture a brand new wireless modem router, which does amazing things. But you want to understand if you can launch this wireless modem router with a 2-year warranty period. And so this is all down to confidence. Some organizations don't use data to inform this decision. They're just confident it's going to last 2 years because of their engineering first principles, their design habits, their culture. Some organizations, they need to rely on a bit more than that. In some organizations, it's just not possible to rely entirely on good engineering judgment 100% of the time, especially when it comes to answering very quantitative specific questions like this. Can I launch this product with a 2-year warranty period? It's a very specific question. And so whenever you make a decision, it's all based on confidence. The decision maker is going to be having to look at his or her experiences, look at the data that person has, the information that engineers give that person, money this, risk that. It all comes down to confidence. And we all know that we have worked with and for decision makers who have been promoted internally, perhaps, and maybe they have their jobs as executive decision makers just because they spend enough time in an organization. That's more about seniority than skill. We've all come across someone who's paid to make decisions who just simply cannot. Those people who are paralyzed and always throw decisions back in people's faces. Oh, I need more information. I need more data, where they're just trying to not associate their name with the decision because they just don't have any confidence. We don't like those people. So let's talk about confidence in a way that will help make this decision. So a bit of revision. Let's just say we've done some testing, and here are these blue data points representing the times to failure of 30 wireless modem routers that we tested to failure. Maybe in accelerated context, who knows? But anyway, we have 30 data points, and we're going to try and get some confidence from these data points regarding our decision. And for those newbies to these discussions, that's my random hand of failure, the way I represent the random failure process, because failure is a random process and it's influenced by lots of different factors, ranging from environmental factors, use conditions, manufacturing defects, through to as many others as you could possibly imagine. All these factors combine to create a random failure process. And that means that one wireless modem router will have the temerity to fail at a different point in time than another seemingly identical one. They might be seemingly identical, but those microscopic issues that means they're actually a little bit different means that we have what appears to be at least a random process. Now, when it comes to this sort of data analysis, one very popular approach is to do Weibull analysis, which is where we do magic and we squish these data points and squirm them and scale them to be put on a chart like this. And so you can see we have a pretty weird scale going on here. The horizontal scale is simply the logarithmic scale, which is for every unit increase step you go to the right, you go up by a factor of 10. So the logarithmic scale is influencing the horizontal axis. The vertical axis, the CDF function or the failure function or the percentage of things that have failed. You can see as more of our wireless modem routers fail, the data points get higher and higher, representing the fact that more have failed. And the vertical axis has this weird scale, which is very spread out at the bottom and it's very spread out at the top, but sort of compressed in the middle. It's not done in a very symmetric way anyway. But if you want to know where this chart comes from, this weird scale, feel free to do one of my Weibull analysis courses or look at my Weibull analysis webinars. But what you can see here from these data points is that it's sort of creating a straight line, which is what one of Weibull analysis is really good at doing. It's really good at pulling out these data points and visualizing them in a different way, such that if there's a straight line, we are now starting to learn about that random failure process. Turns out the Weibull analysis does a pretty damn good job of creating straight lines in this weird scale whenever failure is caused by a single dominant failure mechanism. And here we have these data points which are creating a roughly straight line. Now, before people start tearing into this claim that this is a roughly straight line, just so you know, this is what straight looks like in the world of reliability. And we'll come back to this outrageous claim I've just made. This is a straight line-ish. But failure is a random process. So even data which comes from a distribution which should create a perfectly straight line, there's always going to be some variation, which is what you can see here. So if I was to draw a line of best fit, how confident are you that this red line here is the true line representing the cumulative distribution function, the CDF, or the failure function? You can see it does a pretty good job of fitting the data points, but it's just still, long story short, the best guess. It's not the line, it's just a best guess. So it's clearly there is an attempt to have this line marry up or combine, or not combine, that's a wrong term, but try to represent the story that our data is telling us. So that's a rhetorical question. How confident are you that this is a true line representing the CDF? The reality is I would expect the true line to become more and more accurate if we got more and more data points. But given we have 30 data points, this seems like a pretty good guesstimate. And so when we talk about lines of best fit, we actually should be talking about this sort of stuff here. This is what we call a 90% confidence interval, this blue region here. You can see it sort of has a linear approach to it and sort of goes down from the left-hand side up to the right-hand side. And essentially software is using the exact same process we looked at when we're trying to work out if that shoe was worn by a male or a female to generate a more sophisticated interpretation of confidence, but it uses exactly the same processes that we talked about earlier to generate this region here, this region of 90% confidence. And essentially this blue region here is a region within which this data anyway says, well, if we do assume that the Weibull distribution does indeed describe the underlying failure process, and we've got a lot of reasons to think that the Weibull distribution does describe lots of failure processes. And if you want to know why, please feel free to revisit one of my other webinars on the topic. The Weibull distribution does a fantastic job, as discussed, of modeling lots of naturally occurring failure mechanisms. And so this blue region here is the region within which the true line of best fit, if we had a million, billion, trillion, quintillion data points, would lie, or if we had a state of total knowledge. But given that we've only got 30 data points, we have to deal with confidence. And the reason why is because we are going to be using confidence when it comes to making that decision. So remember, the decision we're trying to inform is, can we launch with a 2-year warranty period? So on this chart, let's go to 2 years right there, draw a line up, and we see that our line, when it draws up, it was drawn up, I should say, is intersects the boundaries of this confidence interval at 4.6% and 16.6%. So that means, based on our data, we're 90% certain that at 2 years, 4.6 to 16.6% of our wireless modem routers will have failed. Now, that doesn't give us the answer yes, no, just yet, but we're starting to make some progress. And why is that important? Well, we can never, ever, ever give our decision maker, in most cases, an unequivocal, absolute certain yes. There's still opposite yes or no, I should say. There's obviously times where we can say this is what the right call is based on the 30 data points you can see on the screen right now, but that has to be based on confidence. And with these 30 data points, the probability density curve associated with these 30 data points, well, again, if we're asking our computer to draw a line of best fit for the probability density curve, good luck with that. Instead, we're going to have this this illustration here, which is I haven't found an analogous term in any textbook yet, but let's call it confidence contours. And the idea is the most outermost lightest shaded blue region is a 90% confidence region. Then the next contour in represents 80%, next contour in represents 70%, all the way down to the narrowest contour region of 10%, where it's very, very sort of collapsing around a central line. And you can see that there is a tendency, there is a pattern that's starting to emerge. That there is no doubt, even though we really need to remember that we're not 100% confident about what that line might look like. And so how confident would you be in predicting, for example, when 10% of your systems fail, when this is the reality of your understanding of the probability density curve from these 30 things that we tested until failure? And when it comes to confidence, it always depends on the question as well. I mean, people ask me, how many samples do I need in my sample size to be confident to make a decision? Well, sometimes you only need perhaps 1 or 2. And before people say, hang on, that's such a small number. You can't possibly make decisions confidently when you have a sample size of 1 or 2. Well, sometimes you can. For example, working with an organization which needed essentially a big, powerful transformer to run a laser cutting operation. They were choosing between 3 potential options and only able to get samples, 1 or 2 samples of each. And their duration, the service life of the product they were making was about 2 to 3 years of continuous cutting, which is actually a long time in the world of laser cutting. And these transformers they had, well, they accelerated some testing, and effectively they accelerated testing, which was based on some good physics, to the point where they were able to replicate about 60 years worth of continuous use into this accelerated life test. 2 of them did not fail. 1 of them failed, but right at the end. And the question I was asked was, well, how confident can I be? How confident can I be in selecting one of these transformers? And the reality is, well, you can be almost supremely confident that any one of those 3 will work, because the question you're asking is about 2 years. The single time to failure you have suggests it's going to be 50 plus years of continuous use before that transformer fails. So the fact that you only have 1 single failure, that's not good for confidence in terms of the amount of information you get. But of the information you get, it suggests that the metric you're focusing on exceeds your requirement by such a margin that there's actually way more confidence than you might otherwise think. So it always comes to the question you're trying to answer. But if it's all about the first 10% of things failing, then this contour of confidence is a problem. Now look at what happens now when we add lots more data points with those contour intervals. So you can see that they collapse down to a much tighter region. They're still there, but they're almost creating a single line. So we are now way more confident in trying to understand how long it will take before 10% of our things will fail. So confidence is not just, yes, it is, or it does come from information, but it also is based on what question you're trying to answer. So hopefully you think those little animations are cool, but where do we get the statistical confidence from? And that comes from this idea of the likelihood. Now, here is a potential probability density curve or candidate probability density curve for these 30 data points. A probability density curve just essentially describes the relative likelihood of certain random variables like times to failure having a certain value. And essentially, when we do statistical analysis with computers helping us, all the computers do is say, well, what about this one? Let's try this one. What about this one? And so computers will get a curve like this. This is an example instance of a Weyl distribution, and we want to know how likely is this probability density function going to be. So what is the likelihood, I should say, that this probability density function PDF curve describes a random failure process for our wireless modem router. And you can see that maybe at first glance, it seems to peak at the right areas. It seems to be at highest where the data points are clustered the most, which is cool. But like our shoes, it would be really good to have a number associated with this likelihood. So for example, let's look at the time to failure of our 20-second wireless modem router, that blue data point right there, 11.52. Draw a line straight up from 11.52. The height of this candidate probability density function curve is 0.048. So that's the height of this probability density curve right there. Now, some of you might be saying, why are you torturing us with this nonsensical dalliance in terms of statistics? Well, let's just pull this thread for a little bit more. If we do the same for all the other data points, draw a line straight up from where the time to failure actually was to the candidate probability density curve. Well, it turns out that statistically speaking, the likelihood of this curve is simply the product of all these heights. So we take the heights of each one of these lines and we multiply them together to get a number, which represents this thing called the likelihood. And so in this case, the likelihood is 4.724 by 10 to the power of minus 39. And some of you might be saying, good Lord, that's a very small number. And it is. But that's okay, because the likelihood is not probability. This doesn't tell us it's a 4.724 by 10 to the power of minus 39 probability that this is the right curve. Likelihood is only a relative measure. Relative. So let's just keep that word in mind, relative. Because we can do this for different probability density curves. What probability density curve is this? Does anyone know what distribution this gray probability density curve comes from? A little bit of revision for those veterans. This probability density curve number 2. Exponential, well done. Fantastic. Exponential curve describes things that never wear out, never have infant mortality. It's a mathematically simple probability density curve, which is why we see it a lot in textbooks. But because lots of things wear out and wear in the real world, we rarely see it in the real world. Exponential distribution is most at home in textbooks in theory where we're trying to simplify things. So we know the exponential distribution, as a rule, doesn't do a good job of describing times to failure of things like wireless modem routers that wear out. So let's just see what that means. If we draw lines up for each data point to the height of the exponential distribution probability density curve, and that is the balance point of our probability density curve. What's the balance point of a probability density function? Anyone remember? What is the balance point? Mean time to failure. Well done, Kevin. Fantastic. All right. So for this exponential distribution, it actually has the same mean balance point as the sample of observed times to failure. And we multiply the heights of all these lines to get this number over here, 4.553 by 10 to the power of minus 41. So you might remember that the previous number we came up with, that Weibull distribution, was in terms of 10 to the power of minus 39. So even though these are extraordinarily low numbers, this is 100 times less likely than that Weibull distribution probability density curve we came up with. So we can put this likelihood on a gauge over here with this likelihood of this probability density curve number 2. That's a very low number. It's right down the bottom. And it has, like I said, it's in the order of 100 times less likely of the likelihood of the first probability density curve we had. So you can say with some confidence that this exponential distribution is not the one for us. We are way more confident that the first one we looked at is going to do a much better job of modeling this distribution, this time to failure. Now, here is the bell curve, the normal distribution. Now, this is the bell curve, just so you know, that does the best job of fitting the time to failure of these 30 data points. You can see the data points, the balance point of those data points is exactly the same place as the balance point of the bell curve sitting on top of it. And the standard deviation of the bell curve behind it has the same standard deviation of the observed times to failure. What's the big problem with the normal distribution describing times to failure for our wireless modem router? Can anyone see the big underlying philosophical, physical issue we have with this bell curve describing time to failure of our wireless modem router? Anyone? The curve goes negative, less than 0. That implies that it's possible for this thing to have failed before it started being used. Before people start throwing really cool ideas about how it could have failed during production, or some sort of weird Stephen Hawking based interpretation of quantum gravity and how that might warp time, all that sort of stuff. We know in the real world, our wireless modem router cannot fail before time 0. So straight away, we know this normal distribution doesn't describe the time to failure of our wireless modem router. But that said, we can still go through the process of drawing lines up from those data points to this bell curve, which does the best job of fitting the data points. And we see that its likelihood is about 1.86% of the likelihood of the first probability density function we came up with, even though that's not possible to describe our underlying process. So you can see that no matter what, we should always be questioning. If software gives us a number, says that this distribution is the most likely, the maximum likelihood estimate, or you should use this model as opposed to that one. Well, there's a chance that when the numbers are run, if the numbers are the only thing that matter, you might have a probability density or probability distribution which appears to be head and shoulders above that of another. But if it suggests there's a pretty decent chance of there being, for example, a negative time to failure, well, we need to keep thinking. We should never stop critically thinking about the underlying process. And so even though there is a number associated with the likelihood, in the real world, we say this is not describing what's happening. So it really should have a confidence or likelihood of 0, at least philosophically. But when we use the quantitative approach, and remember, the computer doing this doesn't know that the random variable can't have a negative value. We know that, the computer doesn't. And so we should always combine what the computer tells us with what our experience shows us. And this is going back to that first probability density curve, whose likelihood is considerably higher than that of the other 2 candidate probability distributions we looked at. And so just so you know, this is the Weibull distribution with the highest likelihood of all candidate Weibull distributions, with a scale parameter of 9.137 and a shape parameter beta of 1.629. So This is all well and good, but in practice, these likelihoods are difficult to use to tell us our confidence. I mean, that's hopefully you'll agree that that's 90% confidence region on our Weibull plot. That was visually useful. We could draw lines up and say, okay, works out. This tells us that we would expect that between these two figures of things to fail at a particular point in time. And I see Kevin's comment looks a lot like a log normal distribution, which it does. Um, which I talked about the log normal distribution last month, so I don't want to steal my own thunder or eat away at today's conversation, but it's a fair observation, Kevin. Well done. So what we're going to see now is the gold standard approach to understanding confidence when it comes to things like test data for our wireless modem router. So we get some test data from our wireless modem router. Here are our 30 times to failure for 30 wireless modem routers. And yes, we can generate our best guess at the probability distribution, but we want to go a lot more than that. Now, I'm going to just make sure we hold on to ourselves while we look at the next image, which is about to come up any second. There it is. This magnificent surface, it's very shiny, nice color, nice copper color scheme. This is what we call the likelihood function based on the Weibull distribution as a model. So let's just break this down just a little bit. Why am I torturing you with yet another concept when it comes to statistics? Well, you can see this is a surface. It's not a line, it's a surface. It looks like a hill, looks like a mountain. Now, if you look at the axes, you can see the axis on the right is the scale parameter, the characteristic like, which is one way of describing the shape of a Weibull distribution. On the left-hand side, there's an axis which has the shape parameter going from 0 up till 2.5-ish. You can see, okay, based on this surface, it looks like the majority of this mountain, this hill, seems to sit on this region where the shape parameter goes from 0 to 2.5 and the scale parameter goes from 0 to 16. And it just so happens that this likelihood function, if we were to look at its highest point, the highest point happens to be where the shape parameter is 1.629 and the scale parameter is 9.137. Those were the parameters of the Weibull distribution, which had the highest likelihood out of those three curves we looked at previously. This is what we call the maximum likelihood for our Weibull distribution as a candidate model for describing time to failure of our wireless modem router. But the fact that we have this hill, it goes down pretty steeply each side, but you can still see there's a chance, or this surface is telling us that there's a chance that these parameter values might not be exactly 1.629 and 9.137. You suspect it's pretty close to those two guesses because that's where the surface is the highest, but there's a lot of volume to this curve. But long story short is you can work out the likelihood of every conceivable possible combination of Weibull distribution parameter values. You can see that, for example, a scale parameter of 2 and a shape parameter of also, let's say 1.5, well, that describes a point way down in the plains beneath this mountain. So that combination of parameters is highly unlikely. But as those parameters start moving towards the foothills and into the mountain itself, all the way to the point, or all the way to the peak, then you're starting to deal with potentially likely parameter pairs for our candidate Weibull distributions. Now, what you're about to see now is my computer taking this surface and doing some really cool things with it, because I want to use this surface to, I mean, the surface might look good. It's obviously in the set to the standards of the beholder. I think it looks good. Maybe I'm the minority, but I think it's a pretty cool looking surface. But it still doesn't give me any useful information about working out if I can launch my product with a warranty period of 2 years. To do that, I'm going to ask my computer to essentially start randomly sampling parameter pairs. But here's the deal. I'm going to tell my computer, I want you to sample where it is more likelihood for you to pick a beta and eta pair based on the height of this surface. That means that if the beta and eta pair are way down in the plains beneath this surface here, they're unlikely to be picked. But if they're on the top of the mountain, they're way more likely to be picked. And when my computer says no worries, and go and do that, let's just see what happens. You're going to see black dots and contours. So contours and red boxes help sort of visualize what the computer is seeing, but then it will randomly sample black points based on these beta and eta pairs. And you can get to see these black points starting to emerge as my computer goes through and says, all right, I'm going to start randomly sampling, where the higher the surface, the more likely it is for me to select a pair from that the all possible pairs I can select from. And so you can see where I think this is 1,000 data points. You can see they're really clustering around the mountain. And if we change our perspective and instead look from the top, you can see that these blue contour lines sort of represent the shape of that surface, but looking from the very top. And the black points really do cluster around where this surface is the highest. Now, why am I doing this? Well, each one of these data points, I should say, randomly sampled parameter pairs describes a Weibull distribution. And what that means is I can take these 1,000 data points, go back to my Weibull plot, and each time, each one of these black dots will essentially define another potential straight line of best fit on this chart. And so if I plot 1,000 straight lines based on these 1,000 randomly sampled parameter pairs, you can start to see that, sure, there's some variation. They're still clustering around a sort of central value, a central region of confidence. And I can ask my computer to do this. I think I did ask my computer to eventually do this 1,000,000 times. And when I do this 1,000,000 times, we can start to then create this region of confidence, where this blue region here represents regions where 90% of the straight lines drawn from those black dots on the left-hand side fall. And I can even go one step further by saying, okay, out of those 1,000 or million straight lines, I can go to 2 years, draw a line straight up, and where that line intersects each and every single one of these straight lines, now we have a sample of CDF estimates at 2 years. In fact, you can see that those CDF estimates are clustering around a value of about 8% at 2 years. And we can even put this clustering of data points onto another chart. We can see that this clustering of data points, the histogram represents those clustered data points, and this is for about 1,000,000 samples. You can see, okay, now here we have the probability of warranty period failure, the probability of our thing failing in our 2-year window. You can see it's not 0, it's not 30%, but it's somewhere in between. You can see it seems to sort of cluster somewhere between 5 to 10%. So this is essentially what the statistics are telling us in terms of confidence. We can actually go one step further, because we might know that our wireless modem router costs $125 a customer will pay $125 for each unit. $10 of those 125 is profit. So for every $125 worth of wireless modem router that is purchased, 115 was spent making that wireless modem router. $10 is the profit we keep for the sale. It's not a lot, but that's not unusual for this sort of stuff. And that also means that if our wireless modem router fails within the warranty period, we're not going to fix it. We just send a replacement. And that will cost us $115, because that's how much it costs to manufacture. So $115 cost to manufacture, $10 profit, $125 recommended retail price. So if we know the cost of each warranty action and we know the profit we make for each sale, we can say, well, we know on average how much money we'll make per unit if we have a certain percentage of which ones will fail. And so we can change this histogram to one which is profit per unit. And even though we have this histogram here to represent the fact that we had sampled CDF values, like I said, I actually asked my computer to do this 1,000,000 times, which essentially allows me to create a beautifully smooth probability density curve. Now we're starting to talk. Remember, the decision was all about, can I launch my product with a 2-year warranty period? This probability density curve says, well, if we do launch with a 2-year warranty period, there's a 40.73% probability of a loss, because we're not exactly sure about the likelihood of our thing failing in 2 years, but based on our statistical analysis so far, it's a 40.73% chance that the warranty costs will exceed all we make. So there's a 40.73% chance of a loss. The expected profit is 32 cents per unit. Now, this doesn't tell us if we can or can't launch a product with a 2-year warranty period. It's still up to us to interpret what this is telling us. However, now we have some really useful information. And I would guess that many decision makers would say, you know what, this is too risky. We can't risk a 40.73% chance of a loss if by advertising this wireless modem router with a 2-year warranty period. I can't have an expected 32-cent profit on average if it takes into consideration the possibility of any scenario moving forward. There might be additional wrinkle to this analysis in that perhaps offering a 2-year warranty period means that thousands more customers purchase our wireless modem router, in which case that would then offset the fact that our expected profit per unit is less. But now we have some decision actionable information. Now, this is what confidence looks like when it comes to statistics. But like I said, there's always lots of things we should consider, like the fact that bell curve, which was the best bell curve that could fit our data, that bell curve clearly should never be allowed to be used because it has a negative value, even though I come across lots of quality and reliability engineers who feverishly use bell curves to describe next to everything in their world, even though the data clearly suggests otherwise. Now, that said, all this nonsense, which I just tortured you with, it's a little bit complicated, isn't it? This is a complicated approach. So lots of engineers approximate confidence bounds. So what that means is that instead of using my computer to come up with a million, billion, trillion data points to create this confidence region, which I love doing because it allows me to not have to, or once I have these shape and scale parameter pairs, I can sort of then generate a histogram for anything I want. Percentage of things failing, it's at 2 years, profit, everything else. When I just have this confidence region, this blue confidence region, this is informative, but I can't do that to the same extent. I can have upper and lower limits on profit and loss, but I can't have that beautiful histogram probability dense distribution curve spread of likely profit versus loss. But notwithstanding, this is a confidence region that we tend to use a lot in the world of reliability. And often that's all you need, especially if you're trying to make a decision which is not, let's just say, controversial or not close to the edge. And the software out there can also create this confidence region for you, but that software uses a ton of assumptions, I should say, because it is a little bit complicated. And as a rule, when I'm asking my computer to do this for me, I'm getting it to do things that actually I need to check and make sure it's not doing the wrong thing. So probability plotting software can give you things like this 90% confidence interval, this red region here. You might be going, hang on, that red region, it's not a million miles removed from the blue region, but it's clearly not the same. And that's because of all the assumptions that it makes. And you might be able to say, you know what, that's okay. It's still pretty good enough for maybe the decision I'm trying to make. But you lose this information here. Oh, what's going on here? We're back. So if we have a lot less data though, that's when things get funky. So instead of having 30 data points, let's just say we only have 4. Well, the gold standard approach, where we ask our computer to come up with lots of beta and eta pairs, will create a confidence region like this. This is the 90% confidence region for those 4 data points. You can see the confidence region is wider because there's a lot more uncertainty. However, when we ask our poor old Weibull plotting software that you buy from vendors At places like RAMS, for example, you get this confidence region here, and this is broken. The CDF can never decrease over time. So the fact that our confidence region has boundaries which appear to decrease over time, that's not allowed, statistically not possible. And that's because we have those approximations. And so the approximate confidence bounds are very, very different from the actual confidence bounds because of those assumptions. So you should always be aware of this when it comes to trying to use off-the-shelf software to generate confidence. And let's look at this in a little bit greater detail. So for example, the software generated upper confidence bound has a failure probability of about 90% when the upper confidence bound for the true gold standard confidence region is about 5%. And that's an incredible spread, incredible deviations. You're going, okay, so instead of there being, at worst, a 5% probability of failure, the assumptions will lead to you then assuming that at worst, there'll be a 90% probability of failure. That could lead to years of unnecessary redesign or hundreds of thousands of dollars of unnecessary testing, or insert insane cost here from generating confidence without knowing where the confidence comes from. And so we have two different confidence regions here, but these are just regions, these are shapes. Confidence is all about what you were doing with the information presented to you. So reliability is a measure of your system, and confidence is a measure of you. Some organizations are confident because they take reliability seriously. The rest often try to test their way to confidence or try to comply with the standard because that's the only way they understand how things fail to the extent they want to. And so, well, we comply with the standard, therefore we're confident moving forward. No, that's not confidence. That's defendability. So if anyone says, well, this thing's still broke, you just shrug your shoulder and say, well, we did it in accordance with standards. So obviously the standards is at fault. No. Confidence is a very deep, basic emotion. Confidence comes from understanding the process. Yes, there is always a place for statistics, but confidence, first and foremost, that your thing is going to last, for example, a 2-year warranty period, has to start with the fact that you designed it well in the first place. And of course, if you have very quantitative, specific decisions to make based on 2-year warranty periods and the like, you might then need to have statistics to help you generate more confidence or the right amount of confidence or make meaningful risk-based decisions. There's nothing wrong with that. But as a rule, if you only ever generate confidence from statistics, you are in trouble. That means that you have forgotten or don't understand what goes into making reliable products. And so confidence is a measure of you. It is not a measure of your product. So before we call it quits for today, are there any questions? Any questions at all? Thank you for that feedback, Manny. Much appreciated. Any questions about confidence? No one has the confidence to ask a question. Kevin asks, what do you think of the use of confidence bounds in reliability requirements? Kevin, are you talking about, for example, a lower confidence bound on reliability being specified? Is that the sort of thing you're referring to? Thank you, Vasu, for your feedback. Yeah, okay, so B10 at 90%, 5% confidence. So just for those who aren't in the world of bearings or some of the other terminology or aren't aware of some of the terminology used out there, B10 is the time by which we expect 10% of bearings to fail. It's a fantastic little metric. It's been copied by lots of other organizations and industries, but of course the B stands for bearings. And so when it's used outside of the bearing industry, we use the letter L to represent life. So L10 life of all things besides bearings, B10 life for things, for bearings, I should say. So the B10 life at 95% confidence, and usually that means we want the B10 life to exceed some requirement, B10 life requirement, with 95% confidence. As soon as you have confidence in specifications, you are combining that specification with a testing regime. So that testing regime, sorry, I just realized there's a Q&A window I didn't have open, so there's a few Qs over there. I'll come back to that one in a tick. So essentially, yeah, like Kevin's writing, you have, I want a requirement. We want my bearing to B10 life to exceed 1 million cycles, which means that I want to be 95% certain that the bearing I get from supplier A will have a B10 life that exceeds 1 million cycles. You only ever see that when you have a corresponding test regime in mind. Thank you, Brian. Much appreciated. And so you can never uncouple the two. The B10 life, for example, could be specified as an absolute. B10 life must exceed this, that, or the other. And often there is a ton of data out there for specific bearings, which allow you to not need to have a 95% confidence claim associated with it. And so 95% confidence means that 1 out of every 20 decisions you make, 1 out of every 20 ball bearing selections, acquisition processes you go through, you'll get an unreliable ball bearing. It's up to your risk tolerance. The issue I have with lower confidence bounds being specified is not a direct issue. It's just that it automatically focuses assurance onto testing and nothing else. And so there's no room for expert judgment. There's no room for understanding how your thing is going to fail. There's no room for things you can do in your plant to mitigate or prevent failures. There's no room for understanding how condition-based maintenance can be involved. There's no room for any of that stuff. And as soon as you have these requirements where you have a 95% confidence bound or something similar, it's coupled to a test regime to assure that it meets the requirement. And often that has an undesirable outcome where people stop thinking about reliability until testing. Does that come anywhere close to answering your question, Kevin? Thank you. All right. Manny writes, yeah, not a problem, mate. When decomposing a system level reliability requirement, i.e. 90% R with 95% confidence, down to the component level, how does the confidence level get decomposed? Ooh, that's a reliability allocation question. And the issue with that is that often when you have a system reliability requirement of 90% with 95% confidence, well, then if you have 100 components, for example, well, without getting the numbers exactly right, that you need to have each component's reliability needs to be in the order of 99.9%. Now, the closer the requirement gets to 100%, the harder it is to generate confidence. And so you might be able to generate a certain level of confidence about, a component exceeding 90% reliability. But if you want to have that same level of confidence that another component exceeds 99.9% reliability, then you need to test often thousands more components to get the same level of confidence. And so what that means is that when you decompose, essentially what might have been, from a statistical perspective, if you test the entire system until failure, you could have a manageable number of systems under test to meet the 90% reliability requirement. But when you decompose to those 100 components, each with a 99.9% reliability requirement, and if you're going to test each and every single one, if you're going to specify a confidence, then each and every single one needs to often have thousands of components tested in order to meet the confidence level. So most people don't even think about that when they decompose reliability requirements. And as a rule, it never ends well. Does that answer your question, Manny?
And Chris, before you get too far, take a look up in the chat to a question from Mitch. Paraphrase, how do technical leaders react to this type of philosophy?
Where is...
It's above Kevin's.
Huh, I can't see it.
Well, it reads, I'll
So,
read it again for you. It's, how do technical leaders react to this type of philosophy?
oh, I see it. Yes. Okay. So, how do technical leaders react? Well, that's sort of how long's a piece of string in a way, because lots of technical leaders have different tolerances for making risk-based decisions. I would argue that, for example, let's just say putting a chart like this. Let's see. Let's just say putting that in front of a technical leader, they would react poorly because they are not as into confidence and the statistics and the likelihood as much as we are, because we are slaves to the process, so to speak. So, first thing I'll say to qualify my answer is what is it you're putting in front of your technical leader? If you're putting something like this, where that this is closer to this sort of crux behind the decision, they will react a lot more positively. Even compared to this one over here, probability of warranty period failure, that might mean a lot more to your technical leader than that horrible likelihood chart I showed you. But if you can get it to the point where it's showing this sort of stuff, because they're all about profit for this decision, this is one of the objectives, then you are more likely to get a positive outcome. A lot of technical leaders are very sick of us as an industry because we put stuff, as opposed to putting useful information in front of them, we try to show off. We try to show all the amazing things we did to get to these numbers. But if you have this might be the only diagram you put up there, but you explain it, this might elicit a more positive response. Now, you're always going to have a technical leader who just says, give me the answer, yes or no. And if the answer is wrong, then it's going to be your neck on the chopping block. So I haven't given you I suppose, a really specific answer, but the key thing I'd say is always try and take it as far as you can in terms of giving the technical leader decision actionable information. If you can draw a pretty chart like this, fantastic. If you can explain this chart and the technical leader understands what's going on, fantastic. You might even want to, in addition to this chart, have the same chart for a 1-year warranty period and to compare the two. But as a rule, we don't want to put Weibull plots up there or likelihood charts or things like that. Does that answer your question, Mitch? Let's see. Okay, thank you. All right, see you, Agent. All good. So Manny, did that come? Yeah, okay. So yes, I saw that response. Yeah, so Mitch writes that the confidence should come from our process and understanding, not just what just the statistics tell us. Fantastic. Kevin writes, I've heard the only way to incorporate confidence bounds into system reliability calculations, i.e. R90, C90, for example. You must set up simulations like Monte Carlo sims to compute the system R. Is that the case? As a rule, yes. The technical answer is sometimes you can solve it theoretically using fault trees and reliability block diagrams. If I had that if I had that problem where I had essentially data regarding the reliability performance of components, then I'd use Monte Carlo simulation. But what you cannot do is simply have the R simply just say this component has a reliability that exceeds 90% with 90% confidence. That doesn't tell me a whole lot about how the reliability is spread. And so just having that, this is 90% reliable with 90% confidence for component A and component B, all the way down to a component Z, of itself doesn't give you a lot when it comes to being able to understand what the system reliability is with any level of confidence. So you need to have, as opposed to that single number, you need to have the distribution of reliability for each component. Does that make sense, Kevin? Awesome. Thank you. All right. So thanks for joining us, Julie. Thank you, Shashir. I just realized some questions over in the Q&A I've been neglecting. Confidence acts as a measure of you because it reflects your own ability, self-worth. Well, self-worth might be might be a little bit more Freudian. But yeah, I take your point. I understand that there's a link Carl's have provided to all sorts of interpretations of confidence. Andrew wrote, perhaps cases could be reversed if we're looking at dress shoes. Absolutely. If we were having dress shoes where the style, going back to our original, our initial shoe conundrum, if we had a dress shoe which was clearly masculine in style, it would give us a lot more confidence that the wearer was a man. But of course, a detective at the crime scene might be asking him or herself, hang on, what's the chance that this was a female wearing male shoes to throw us off the trail? Again, confidence is not just the statistics. And Carl talks about confidence analysis, has a link to a discussion on what confidence analysis is, and he implores that statistics play a crucial role in reliability analysis, which it does, and tons of links there. And what a PDF is, what the mean time to failure is, and statistics are gold standard. Oh goodness, here we go. Approach refers to using a widely accepted, I disagree with that, highly accurate benchmark or reference point to evaluate performance of other tests or methods. If I said widely accepted, then all the militaries across the world use test regimes assuming the exponential distribution. So the approach where they have this way they measure MTBF assumes the exponential distribution for everything ranging from a missile to a tank. And we know that missiles and tanks tend to wear out. So it's widely accepted, even though we can prove time and time again it's not the case. But I do take your point regarding the discussion about gold standard. All right, we're down to 13 heroes who are still here. Any more questions before we call it quits?